taught me how to live. Daddy taught me how to give. Both of them had their own sins. Down to the river, every man has felt the shame. All our blood, it runs the same. Father, hear us as we pray. Down to the river, down to the river. Sing, oh, oh, bury me, carry me, oh, oh, far beneath, oh, oh, fire and water me, going down deep, singing, oh, oh, bury me, carry me, oh, oh, far beneath, oh, oh, fire and water me, washing me clean, carry
Welcome to Cryptid Wilderness Research Podcast. I am Daniel Becker up here in Alaska. Joining me as always from Quincy, Washington, my fellow host, Matt Slater.
Hello.
How you doing, Matt?
Things are going really, really well here. Things are going really well. It's still cold, but we still don't have any snow, and I'll take that.
Well, up here in Anchorage, it's basically the same temperature of the surface of the moon. And it's really bad. I can deal with cold, but sometimes I hear Florida. I hear Florida calling.
Definitely.
So today we have another Alaska researcher joining us. His name is Larry Beans Baxter, and he's out of Homer, Alaska. He's the author of the book Abandoned: The History and Horror of Port Chatham, Alaska. He's appeared on multiple documentaries and television shows, and he's currently the host of the podcast Alasquatch. So without further ado, let's bring him in. Larry Beans Baxter.
Hello.
How you doing, man?
Oh, pretty good. Like you, I'm cold. It's freezing up here.
So, Beans, I had the pleasure of meeting you back in October at a speaking engagement at the Anchorage Museum, where you were one of the guest speakers, and you did a fine job there. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem, man. I had no idea I thought me, Chuk, Rob Roy, and the Boreal Bigfoot Expo people were it as far as Bigfoot enthusiasts in Alaska. But every once in a while, I find out about somebody new.
Yeah, it was great meeting you guys. So you have a background in law enforcement. You have a background in military, and you're down there out of Homer, Alaska. So why don't we start by having you tell us how you got into this journey of cryptids?
Well, I've always been interested in the strange and unexplained. I grew up across the road from a library in a small town in Kentucky, and there wasn't a lot to do. So luckily, I'm a reader, so I read a lot, and I read my favorite section of the library was where they kept the Time, Life, Mysterious Universe type books, and I read a bunch of those, and the Crestwood Monster books, and I just love to read about ghosts and UFOs and cryptids. And I as a kid, I grew up in that area of In Search Of and Ghostbusters and all that kind of stuff, and it just really got me into the paranormal and the strange and unexplained. And it kind of waxed and waned as I got older, and discovered things like cars and girls and stuff like that. And then I'd always come back to it, though. I'd always like, oh, I wonder what's going on, with Bigfoot or UFOs, or maybe I'd join MUFON for a little bit and get the newsletter, or I'd read 40 Times and see what was going on. And I joined the military in my early 20s, and I said, man, I don't care where the Army sends me as long as it's nowhere cold. And straight to Alaska I went. And the joke was on Uncle Sam because I actually enjoyed it up here. I actually liked it. Met my wife. She's from up here and been up here pretty much ever since. I went back home for a little bit after I got out of the Army and immediately came back. And just I I thought, man, if there's anything to this Bigfoot thing, it's going to be up here in Alaska. Like, this is the place for it. A lot of people just don't have the concept of how big Alaska is. Like, there's just, you can't explain it to them. It's massive. It's almost the size of the continental United States. It stretches from like Florida all the way up to the top of like Minnesota or something. It's just ginormous. And if Bigfoot lived anywhere, I think he would probably live here. And the great thing about Alaska is that it's so huge, and the terrible thing about looking for Bigfoot in Alaska is that it's so huge, because there's just so much room for them to be. And if they don't want to be around people, they certainly don't have to be. So it's kind of it's a blessing and a curse all in one. It's I found an area where I think, like, man, there might be something here, and sure enough, within a season or two, nothing's going on. And we had some forest fires come through a few years ago and burn through an area that I was pretty interested in. And it seems like since then there just hasn't been anything going on there. So hopefully they just moved somewhere else and they didn't get hurt by the fire. But yeah, I've just always been interested in it. And I think Bigfoot is probably the most grounded one that we could have a chance of proving exists. I think with a lot of the more paranormal stuff, it's not that I don't necessarily think it exists. I just think that it's probably it's so intangible that it's going to be hard, at least with the technology we have, to prove that it exists. It's not predictable and repeatable. But with Bigfoot, technically, I'm in the ape believer. I think it's a ape. It doesn't mean that there might be more to it. I'm certainly open to the possibility that it's more, but I'm going to have to see more before I start thinking that it's an interdimensional being or something. Yeah, it's just a lifelong passion of mine. And then, I got out of the military, went into law enforcement. I was lucky enough that I worked for a department that was pretty liberal with training. I got to basically go to whatever training I wanted to, as long as I could prove that it would improve the department. So I got to take a lot of really cool trainings, like interview and interrogation, which really, it's amazing how well law enforcement techniques and training transfers over to looking for Bigfoot. The interview and interrogation, you don't know how many times I've used that when talking to witnesses. Forensic, collection, evidence collection, that's Bigfoot bread and butter pretty much right there. So a lot of the skills that I developed over my career really translate well over into Bigfooting. And so that's kind of what keeps me going, is that I've got these skills and training, and I'm like, yeah, I think, if I apply them right, maybe I don't think that I'm going to ever prove that Bigfoot exists to the world, but I'm out to prove it to myself. And if I bring some other people along, that, even better. But for the most part, yeah, I'm curious. I want to know what it is and if it's really out there.
So you authored the book called Abandoned: The History and Horror of Port Chatham, Alaska. For those of our viewers who may not have seen the television documentaries and may not be familiar with the story of Port Chatham, can you give us a summary of the story?
So Port Chatham is a small fishing village, or was a small fishing village on the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. And it was founded in the early 1900s. It was kind of a company town. We would have a lot of similar towns in the South, or in Kentucky with the coal mines. You'd have the company towns where basically the town is run by a coal company, and they own the store, they own the lodging that the workers live in. And Port Chatham was very similar to that. There was one family that basically ran the entire town. They owned the cannery, they owned the sawmill, they owned the store, and they just ran the town. And they employed local natives to work in the cannery and the sawmill. They made fish traps in the sawmill that they would catch the fish in, and then process the fish in the cannery. And the population, I've heard it anywhere from 200 to 300. Usually it was a year-round village. There was people there all the time. And rumors started popping up that there was something not right in the village, that Nantinaq, which is the local name for the Bigfoot, that he was pestering the people in the town and bothering the people in the town. And the legend goes, I've never found documentation of this, but the legend goes that the workers basically threatened to walk off the job and strike if the company didn't do something about the Nantinaq. And they caved and they hired some Pinkerton type security, not Pinkertons, but something similar, to come in and basically guard the town while the men were working. And that seemed to settle things down for a little while. And then there was talks of people going missing, disappearing, some strange deaths. And, I really kind of delved into it after our expedition, after we went up there and looked around. In 2018, a gentleman named Stephen Major approached me and asked if I'd be interested in going out there and filming a documentary called In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man. And I jumped at the opportunity to go out there, even though it's only like from where I'm sitting here talking to you right now, it's like 40 miles that way. It's actually pretty difficult to get to. You got to have a boat, and it's got to be a boat big enough to go, as they say, around the corner into the real ocean, not just in Kachemak Bay. So, if you don't own a decent sized boat, it can be hard to get to, especially in bad weather. So we chartered a boat and went down to Port Chatham and filmed a documentary for, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 days. It was a while. And that's available to watch on YouTube, I believe, for free. And then, I when we got back, I was really enamored with Port Chatham and the history and the story. And I kind of delved into the legend, and I found, all the reports of the missing people and the murdered people. They weren't false, but I think they were exaggerated a little bit, probably by the internet and just word of mouth. It kind of become a rural legend, a suburban legend. And, I did find some information regarding some missing, a missing minor. And, I'm sure it's Alaska. People go missing all the time. I mean, you guys know, you've lived here. And I think, there's plenty in Alaska to worry about without bringing Bigfoot and Nantinaq into it. But in my experience, I talked to a lot of natives about it, and it's pretty much split 50-50 among the native population. Some of them will tell you there's nothing to it. It's just a bunch of legends and hokum. And the other 50% will say it's the most evil place on earth and don't go there. And I personally, I think that, the truth is a little somewhere in the middle. I don't think there was no like Bigfoot massacre where Bigfoot massacred the town. But I also, I think there is something to it. Those stereotypes are there for a reason. Like something happened. There's the tale of Andrew Kamluck that, he was found dead and supposedly was hit with a piece of equipment that was too heavy for a man to lift. So, I think there's something to it. I don't think it was a serial killer. I don't necessarily think it was animal attacks either. But at the same time, I couldn't find like death certificates and like hard evidence, police reports. Funny story, during my research, I was talking to a lady from the vital statistics, the records in Juneau in the state capitol. And I was trying to find Andrew Kamluck's death certificate. And I was telling her, I was like, hey, I'm trying to find this. And she's like, hey, have you tried looking at the Homer Police Department? And of course she didn't know that I worked there at the time. And I was like, no, I can assure you they don't have it. But it's funny because a lot of this happened before Alaska was a state. So there wasn't a lot of like mandatory record keeping. There wasn't a lot of oversight for that kind of stuff. And, I'm sure you guys know from living in Alaska, you'll call somewhere up and you'll be like, hey, I'm looking for this or looking for that. And they're like, oh yeah, that was out in the storage shed and the roof collapsed from the snow load last year. So all that stuff is gone. So, a lot of these people that are like, Port Chatham is hogwash because there's no evidence. There's no like records. And I'm like, you guys don't know Alaska because that kind of stuff, especially in a village that basically was abandoned, was like everybody picked up stakes and moved. I'm sure they took the bare minimum. They weren't worried about records and stuff like that. That stuff either got left behind or was probably ruined before that even happened. And there was a big fire there that happened in the town that maybe some of those records were lost then. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's definitely grew and kind of taken on a life of its own. But like I said, at the same time, I think there's definitely something to it. I mean, you can't talk about Alaska and Bigfoot without mentioning Port Chatham.
So when you first went out there, when you first arrived, did the environment, seem to have a vibe about it? Did it have a look about it of mystery that you thought, maybe there's something here?
So the first time when we went to film in 2018, I kind of felt like I was just excited. I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe we're doing this. This is going to be amazing. And we were the first, I'm not going to say we're the first people to go in there and look for Bigfoot, because I'm sure like locals have gone in there and looked around before, but we were the first people to go in there and basically document it and do a documentary about it. And so, I was filled with a lot of like excitement, and I was like, we're almost like we're going to Disneyland. Like we're going to go to this place that's, all these people have been murdered and it's going to be awesome. And I got there and, it's very ominous. There's a lot, it's thick growth. It's very difficult to traverse, even though there was a town there. I mean, almost all the signs of infrastructure are gone. You're walking and you're like, you got to step over a log, and then, oh, there's a little hole there, and there's no getting anywhere fast, in around there. And we're walking around, and I can't say at least the first day that I didn't get creeped out. I was more kind of in like awe, just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I get a little creeped out kind of towards the end. But when we went back in 2019 to film for the Travel Channel, let me just say, when we left in 2018, I'm like, I want to come back here and build a cabin and live and look for Bigfoot, full time. Like I thought I had a great time, and I was like, I want to come back, and and then we went back in 2019. I was like, this place is trying to kill me, and I'm never coming back here. We went back to film with the Travel Channel in 2019 for the Alaska Triangle, and every time we would go to leave the boat to go on shore and film, the weather would get worse. Like it would be kind of drizzly and rainy. And then every time we'd make the decision, like, okay, let's go. We got to go. Like the weather would pick up, the wind would pick up. There were a couple of times when our skiff almost like got taken by waves. And the first couple of times we're like, oh, haha, like something doesn't want us here. This is, like it's the curse of Port Chatham or whatever. And then it happened so much by the time we left, I was like, there might be something to this. What's that saying? Like once is happenstance, twice is a coincidence, three times is enemy action. I was just like, how many times are we going to almost die, try to get, from the boat to the shore before we either give up or something bad happens? And it was like, you could almost set your watch by it. Like it would be completely calm, flat. And we'd be like, all right, let's go ashore real quick and start filming. And then like here would come the wind. So that was a little creepy. And that kind of, I haven't necessarily been, excited to get back. I won't say that I'll never go back, but I definitely, like, after that, I was like, man, I don't know. It definitely, the vibe seemed off the second time we went back. The first time it was a little different. It seemed like, oh, I'm here to explore and this is fun. And oh, what was that sound? And what was that? And the second time it was definitely more ominous and more just, what are you doing in my house? Get the hell out. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Does getting out there require permission from any of the native corporations?
It does. It is owned by a tribal corporation, and we had permission the first two times, and then we had decided we were going to go back and do another documentary and basically do, there's always people that are like, oh, you should do this and you should do that and you should do it like that. And we thought, well, maybe we should. We'll take more people. We'll spend more time on the ground. Like we'll actually have a team that camps on the ground instead of on the boat. That was one of our problems with the 2 times we went. Is we wanted to I wanted to camp on shore, but to do that, basically, like, they're like, you're going to have a 24-hour guard, and we didn't have enough people. Basically, the film crew, they're not gonna. I don't trust them to watch me while we're sleeping, and there wasn't enough of us. I felt to keep a 24-hour watch and get the adequate amount of rest that we needed. So we ended up sleeping on the boat. But in 2020, we were like, let's do it. Let's go back and do it right. And they reached out, and the tribe had given permission to someone else to go out there and film, and they told us we couldn't go.
For those of our viewers who are not familiar with Alaska, can you tell us about the terrain that's around that area?
So a lot of people, I guess because we went there on a boat, a lot of people think that Port Chatham is an island, and it's not. It's a little tip of land on the very tip of the Kenai Peninsula, and there's some confusion. Port Chatham is actually the name of the bay, the body of water, and then Port Lock was the town. People here in Homer basically use them pretty much interchangeably. You'll hear Port Chatham, but most people just say Port Chatham when they're referring to just that general area. And it's you can't drive there. Really, the only way to get there is either by air or by boat. And sometimes boats will pull in. It's a pretty sheltered bay. It's pretty deep. Goes back in there pretty far. But it's at the very southern tip, and you can't really. I mean, maybe from like Nanwalek or one of the native villages. I think there used to be a trail that you could walk from one of the villages to Port Lock, but I don't think you can anymore. And I know, like, during the heyday, back when the town was active, there was a trail or a road that people would walk from the village to village, and they would do that like to go in for supplies, or maybe if there was like a dance or something, they would use that road to walk. There were no cars there. I assume there were probably livestock and horses, but I don't know that for a fact. But it's very remote. It's the very last. It was the very last bit of civilization before you head out into the ocean proper, heading south out of Alaska from the Kenai Peninsula. And it's just very, very thick. If you go, let's see, if you're facing Homer, if you're facing Port Chatham, if you go east, you're going to run into the Harding ice fields. So there's nothing there. It's just glaciers and ice. And then if you go west, you're going to run into the ocean. And then if you go north and south, you're going to run into the ocean, basically. So it's very remote. It's very hard to get to. It's kind of almost isolated for the rest of the peninsula. And, it's just boreal forests and hills and mountains and very rough terrain. And actually, being there and knowing that there used to be a town there, and just seeing how fast that everything is reclaimed. There's a couple of cabins that are still standing. There's one on the cover of the book. That's probably the easiest one to see when you pull into the Port Chatham. But just knowing that there was like a town there, and we found evidence of like infrastructure. Like we found some water pipes that had been pulled up by, trees would fall over and they'd get pull the pipes up that were in the roots. So they must have had like a water tower and some running water. And just seeing like how thick it is and how like just inhospitable it is, knowing that some dudes walked in there with like axes, not chainsaws, axes, and just like hand tools, and built a town. Man, it really gives you like a sense of perspective for what man's capable of. You're like, if you gave me like modern tools and a whole summer, I don't think I could build a cabin in that place. And, they ended up building a town with just, axes and knives and hammers and nails and just regular, hand tools. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is amazing. Matt, why don't you bring up some of Beans's pictures?
Yeah, we do have a couple of photos of the area.
So That's me. We were getting ready to go. We were waiting on the skiff to come get us, and there was this little like hill. I kind of looked over the Port Chatham, and I was like, man, I'm going to go up there and just kind of see what I can see. And our cameraman, he's like, hey, turn around. And I turned around, and he's like, look over there. And he started taking pictures, and um, that's my favorite. That's like, I've had people tell me like, you should make a poster out of that.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the main cabin. We call it the red cabin. That's the cabin that you can see when you pull into Port Chatham, into the bay. You can see that, and that it looks like it's a nice grassy. You see the fireweed there, and you see it looks nice and like a little field you could run through. That is like covered completely in like logs. I don't know if they've washed up, or I don't know if it's logs from the sawmill, but trying to walk from there to that cabin is like a military obstacle course, because you got to crawl over these huge trunks that are like 4 or 5 feet in diameter, and they're covered in that thick grass that you can't really see them. And it's a workout, man. Like I probably banged my shin and slipped 3 or 4 times walking across that thing. It was a pain in the butt.
So how far back were you able to venture from the village proper?
So where that cabin sits, kind of behind it to the left there's a little trail, and it kind of clears up a little bit once you get into the tree line there, and it's a little bit easier to walk. And back kind of directly behind the cabin there to the left, there's another cabin that you can walk to. And then over, if you go like kind of almost 90 degrees to the left, you can't really see it in the picture, but if you go through those trees there on the left and kind of go up onto the hill that's past that, that's where you find a bunch of the old machinery and infrastructure. And I don't know, it's some weird looking stuff. It looks like maybe some old furnaces and stuff up there. It's all rusted. And it's actually like really close to the edge of the cliff, and it's getting kind of, you can see where it's getting kind of worn away from the ocean, just kind of eating away at it. And one of these days, like all that stuff that's up there is probably going to fall in. And in fact, we found some that had already like fallen onto the beach. And it kind of makes me like, oh man, like maybe somebody should do something to preserve some of this. But I don't know if there's any plans to do anything with that land or not. Probably not. But yeah, one of these days, all that's going to be gone. Those cabins are already, they're pretty sturdy, but a couple more good earthquakes and any one of them could be gone.
Now, is there a lot of bear sign activity there?
So while we were there, we kind of ran into an interesting phenomenon. While we're walking around, there were a couple of areas, especially here by the town site, where there was a lot of bear sign. You'd walk, how bears mark trails, you'd walk around and there would be bear sign, and we were walking around and we found this area where there was it was almost like a huge blueberry field. There was this huge ripe blueberries everywhere. If you watch the documentary, you can see like Mary Beth she picks a lot of them and puts them in a bag. And of course we're just walking around, just popping them in our mouth. And there was an area where all this bear sign was and all these blueberry bushes, and the blueberries were picked clean. I mean, there was just blueberry bushes everywhere, not a blueberry to be had, maybe a few here and there, and bear sign all over the place. Well, we're walking along, and it was almost like we crossed this invisible barrier, because we were walking through, and all of a sudden we didn't see any more bear sign, and there were blueberries on every bush. I mean, every one of them was like packed full. And it didn't really strike me at the time, but afterwards I'm like, man, it's almost like we walked through some like invisible barrier or something, where like, like the bears are like, okay, these are our berries, but we can't touch those berries. So that was an interesting thing that I observed while we were there. It was just off. It was like, why is there no bear poop over here? and there's all kinds of bear poop over there, and all the berries are gone. But over here, the berries are still in the bushes, and there's absolutely no sign of bears. I don't know about you. I've never really seen bears be that discerning. Like, oh, well, I'm going to save those berries for later. We'll come back for those.
Yeah, that is very unusual. Very unusual. So
Yeah.
when you guys, I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just agreeing. Yeah, that's very weird because I mean a bear is just going to keep going until it's full. Like there's no reason why it wouldn't go over there unless there is a reason.
Yeah, it was just kind of weird, and we found kind of a weird up by the machinery. We found this weird like pile of trash, and we didn't think of it that much at the time. We were just kind of like, oh, look at that, that's weird. Like even out here in the middle of nowhere, we can run into trash, and it was just an odd collection of stuff, like not stuff that would have been in Port Chatham while it was active. The town was abandoned in 1950, and some of the stuff up there was like an old like radio and just some old like plastic junk, and it was just kind of collected in this little pile, and we didn't really think much of it at the time. And of course, this is up on the cliff, and I'm like, well, that didn't get put there by the tide. Like, how did all that stuff get collected there? And now that I go back and look at it, I'm like, man, that was really weird. Like, wow, weird collection of junk just to be in the middle of nowhere like that. Just like almost like if you've ever found like a ferret's cache of like shiny objects, it was kind of almost like that, just like the weirdest junk just in a little pile. And it didn't look like maybe it was someone that was like, oh, let's go clean this place up, and then they like left it. It was just a weird little collection of junk. I think there might have even been the back of a TV or something in there, and a radio and some stuff like that. And I just kind of took I got a picture. Believe there's a picture of it in the book, and I took a quick picture of it, and we're just like, oh, that's, look at that. There's even litter out here, in the middle of nowhere. And then it's one of those things where after the fact, I was like, man, I wish I'd have taken a closer look at that to see if there were any like claw marks or teeth marks or anything like that on it. Cause it just, in retrospect, the vibe was off with it.
Are there any deer in that area?
Not here, not to my knowledge. There is some in the place we'll talk about later, Area A. There are deer there, and they're not supposed to be there. So I didn't see any deer sign or anything like that here in Port. There are moose, but I didn't see any deer sign here. So as far as I know, there's not. But I've also, funny story, I've had somebody tell me there's no brown bear there in Port Chatham. And I've also had a gentleman, because I was telling somebody that, and they're like, that's a damn lie, because I've seen them there. So it's kind of weird. It's one of those things. It's like, well, I've never seen one, so it doesn't exist.
So you and your expedition partners were able to get back in there. Did you find any signs of Bigfoot tracks at all?
So we did. There's the one picture I sent you guys. That's kind of a strange impression there. That's a 10.5 extra tough boot there next to it. I don't know. I don't want to call it a Bigfoot footprint. It definitely didn't look like it had any claws attached to it. But it definitely almost looks like a toe pattern there in it. And I did find later on another like 14-inch track that was pushed embedded into some moss. It's very mossy there. Not a lot of hard pack or not a lot of opportunity to find tracks. It's very mossy, very spongy ground. And I did find, like, what I saw was a 14-inch track in some spongy earth. There was like some disturbance in the sand on the beach, and we followed it up to this little game trail. And I looked down and I was like, holy crap, that's a footprint. And I called some of the other guys over, not this one, but I called some of the other guys over to look at it. I'm like, hey, look at this. And it was almost like a Rorschach test. Some of the guys were like, I don't see what you're talking about. And other guys were like, holy crap, it is a footprint. So it was kind of like a Bigfoot Rorschach test. I took some pictures of it, and I was trying every trick I could think of to get it to show up. A lot of times in law enforcement and evidence collection, there's something you can try called oblique lighting, where you shine a light, you put the light on the ground, like shine at the object, and maybe you could get it just to hit it just right where some shadows show up and show the definition of the object. I tried everything I could think of to get the track to show up. And I got pictures of it. I show people every once in a while and they're like, I don't see it. And some people are like, holy crap, that's a big footprint. So, it's not my best work, but I thought it was impressive when I saw it. But this one, it's very intriguing. I don't know what that could be. We found that up not too far from where the all machinery and that junk pile was. And we heard some strange things while we were walking around, almost like a thumping that was always ahead of us. We'd walk into an area and we hear thump, 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 like something was kind of running away from us. And we heard that a couple of times, and we never did figure out what it was. Could have been a moose, a bear, or, Bigfoot. We're in an area known for Bigfoot, so who knows?
So nighttime comes. Did you guys practice any vocalizations, any tree knocks, any responses?
We did some knocks. I thought at one point I had maybe a distant return, but not good enough to say that was a knock. It was kind of ambiguous. And, I don't remember. I don't think we did any vocalizations that first trip. I think we did the second trip because I think Adam got a return on one. If you watch the Alaska Triangle, you see the thermal of something as we're leaving, something comes down the hill. But, it was really, I like to do very innocuous, like when I go into an area to look around, I try not to like make a lot of noise, like knocks or vocalizations, stuff like that. I kind of try and let it just happen. And then maybe like toward the end of the trip, if nothing's going on, then maybe I'll try to employ some knocks or some vocalizations. Most of the time I just kind of like to play dumb camper and hopefully, something comes in and happens. But, we didn't really get any, I would say, interaction where we did something and then we thought we got a response. I think it was probably more, if they were there, I feel like it was more of an observation situation. And you can't sneak up on anything there. You got this huge boat pulls into the bay, drops anchor, people get on the boat, the skiff, they run the skiff up to the shoreline. I mean, there's, we're running the boat engine. I mean, it's not inconspicuous. It's not like you can just show up there and nobody knows you're there.
So before we shift over to Area A in another part of the Kenai Peninsula, I want to throw the ball over to Matt in Quincy, Washington for any follow-ups about Port Chatham.
Yeah, just looking at those photos, it's just surprising how dense the forest is in there. Is there? I've seen the shows that you're referring to that you were on, and just having a chance to have a still photo to just stare at how like the wall of green that presents to people. And I was just kind of curious, with all the research and everything that you've done about Port Chatham, in your opinion, what do you think might be the reason where they just up and left? Did they all leave at once? Was it sort of a slow drawdown, do you think, maybe? Or
personally, I think it was economic death. There was a fire that burned the sawmill. The sawmill made the traps to catch the fish. It was a domino effect. Sawmill burned, couldn't make the fish traps. The family that owned everything, they weren't insured, and they just picked up stakes and left. I believe they went down to Washington, and I don't want to misspeak, but I'm pretty sure they started the Port Lock Canning Company down in Washington. I may be wrong about that, but I want to say that they did. And I think the town just kind of died slowly after that. There was nothing there to keep it alive economically. I will say one thing about Port Chatham though is it doesn't really meet the ghost town criteria that you see a lot of other towns in America. Ghost towns, usually what happens is there's some kind of resource and the resource dries up and then the town dies. And with Port Chatham, you don't have that. You have the sawmill burned down, sure, and they left, but nobody was eager to move back in and restart that town. The lumber's still there, the fish is still there, the resources are still there. It just got left, and I think it probably got left for a reason. I think the place has a bad reputation. Like I said, talking to some of the natives around here, it seems to be 50-50. It's either all, like a bunch of stories to scare kids, or it's the most evil place on earth and you shouldn't go there. And I think it's probably, I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle there. I think there's probably something there. Is it evil, or is it just, like I was telling you earlier, how isolated it is? It's a perfect storm basically for having an aggressive Bigfoot encounter. Because if you go in there and you're fishing all the fish, you're taking all the lumber, you're attacking the environment, you're attacking the food sources, and they don't have anywhere else to go. If they go to the west, there's the Harding ice field. They're kind of boxed in there, the oceans to this side, the oceans to that side. So in my opinion, I think, it's probably a perfect storm for an aggressive Bigfoot to want to defend their food sources, their environment, stuff like that. So, I think that it's very plausible that there was some negative interactions with the Nantinaq, with the townspeople.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and maybe combine the Nantinaq aspect of the situation with the fire at the sawmill. Maybe the fire was just the last straw that broke the back. Just tipped it over the edge, and everybody left. No desire to come back.
Yeah, and there's some other stuff. There's some almost like Skinwalker Ranch type stories out of there. So I don't know. They tell you, if you ever read the Skinwalker Ranch book, the prior residents told the new owners, like, whatever you do, don't dig. And down there, they in Port Chatham, they had they had a chromium mine. They had some digging going on. They had to dig, to build and to chop down the trees, change the landscape. So who knows? Maybe it was a supernatural event.
Dan?
So let's move over to another section of the Kenai Peninsula that you and your partners refer to as Area A. So, coming out of Anchorage, we've got the one highway. And when you're entering the Kenai Peninsula, there's that big sign on the highway saying you're entering the Kenai Peninsula. And I actually consider that the gateway to Bigfoot on the Kenai. That's what I always refer to it as. Tell us about Area A and how you and your partners came about researching that area and some of the things you've experienced there.
So there was a gentleman that bought some land outside of Seward. I won't give the exact location, but he was determined to build a little cabin that he could go fish at. He's a professional dude. He's not into Bigfoot. He's an avid outdoorsman, but not into Bigfoot. Just wasn't his thing. And he buys this property outside of Seward. You have to get on a boat to go there, and it's very reminiscent. It reminds me a lot of Port Chatham, just the way that it's almost the same same environment. You got the spongy mossy ground. You've got the hills and the high elevations in the kind of away from the town site or the cabin site, and a lot of the activity is focused, seems like, up on the hills. And he started building this cabin, and he started hearing some strange things. And like I said, he's an outdoorsman, so he's like, what the hell is that? Like, that sounds like a T-Rex, or that sounds like this, and he's got people out there helping him build the cabin, and they're all like, dude, this is weird. And I don't remember how he come upon it being Bigfoot. I think maybe he had a conversation with a coworker or something, and they might have suggested it. And then he got that, it's like a gateway drug. He gets on the internet, starts looking up Bigfoot stuff, and now all of a sudden, like, we got him, So he reached out to me, asked me to, come out there and poke around. And I did myself, Rob Roy, and Alex Petikoff from Small Town Monsters. We've all been out there, and we've all had different things occur to us out there. And it just, like Port Chatham, it seems like it's almost like a perfect storm for activity. There's, a couple other cabins that are out there that are kind of summer getaways for people, but nobody's out there full time. And, it's just a great environment. And there are deer out there, although Fish and Game will tell you there are not deer out there. Um,
Oh,
I actually got
interesting.
I got some on my trail cam. Well, it started out like I think the owner had seen a couple. We had found some sign. Uh, Alex and I found a bone, I think one year, like a jawbone for a deer. And then this last, not this summer, but the summer before last, I went out there. I actually got live deer on the trail camera. So I mean, we've got sign, bones, actual live specimens out there. And according to the owner, the Fish and Game, he mentioned something about the deer being out there, and they're like, "There's no deer there." So um, there definitely are, and there's just a lot of different activity. A couple of pretty ambiguous sightings from some of the workers that were out there. There was a gentleman that was walking to the outhouse and saw a large pair of red eyes kind of off in the distance, and he stumbled on a root or something, and he looked back up and they were gone. So some creepy stuff like that. A lot of weird vocalizations, a lot of creepy vocalizations, almost bordering on like mimicry. There's been some baby crying. They said there were babies crying in the woods, but that seems to only happen when there's women out there. There's a researcher from Alaska, or he used to live in Alaska, Robert Alley. He made the suggestion that they only hear the baby crying when there's women out there because it's trying to lure the women into the woods. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's damn creepy. He's had some strange things happen. He had a splitting maul out there that he was using to cut firewood with, and it went missing. And he just kind of assumed like, oh, I must have put it somewhere and I can't find it. And because he has this log or this stump that he cuts wood on, right? And he always sets the splitting maul by the splitting stump. And it went missing one day, and he's like, well, what did I do with that? And then he looks for it. He looks all over the property for it, can't find it. Leaves, goes and buys a new splitting maul, comes back for the next trip with his new splitting maul, and his old splitting maul sitting by the stump. So just weird stuff like that. We've set up trail cameras, and we've got wildlife. We've got the deer. We got a wolf, I think, one year out there. There's been a couple of bears seen out there, but not a lot of bear activity. Just every once in a while, there's a bear sighting. But I think the vocalization is probably the most prevalent activity there. There's been some rock throwing. There's a fire ring by the cabin that some guys have been sitting around, and rocks had come and like kind of tumbled down by their feet. I don't think anybody's ever gotten hit by a rock, or at least not hard. And I mean, this has been going on for years, and it seems like it's kind of I'm not going to say it's stopped completely, but it seems like it's kind of degraded over the year. Like it's not quite as prevalent as it used to be. I was out there a couple of years ago and was sitting on the swing on the front porch, and I'm just like, man, like, it's a beautiful area. I mean, just amazing, beautiful view of the mountains. And we get to go out there and hang out, and I'm just kind of like, man, like this sucks. Like we're the Bigfoot, like I'm on a vacation that people would pay thousands of dollars for, at this private cabin. And I'm just like, this sucks. We're the Bigfoot. And I'm on the swing outside. And just it was kind of weird because as soon as I had that thought, like, man, this sucks. Like, why am I coming out here? Nothing's happening. Because I had a couple of trips out there where nothing happened. And I'm like, this sucks. Why am I coming out here? And I swear to God, the minute I had that thought in my head, up behind that cabin, I heard like the clearest knock I've ever heard in my life. And it was kind of weird because I was like, are they reading my mind? Like, did they just hear me think that? And like, oh yeah, we'll show you. We're still here. But nothing else happened after that. But that was weird.
Let's jump back to your thoughts on these creatures. And we like to ask every guest that we have on the same question. What do you think these creatures are if they exist?
I'm in the ape camp, but I could be persuaded otherwise. I've had a couple of weird experiences. I wouldn't go as far to call them woo, but I had a couple of weird experiences that I can't really explain. That one being one of them, where I had the thought and then immediately heard the wood knock. I think probably the simplest explanation is they're just an animal, just like any other animal. However, and all the all the Native Americans have their Bigfoot stories, their Bigfoot legends, their names for Bigfoot. But also, all the other Native Americans also have their trickster spirits. And these trickster spirits are always taken in the form of other animals, bears, foxes, wolves, owls, whatever. So if they can do that, why couldn't they take this form of a Bigfoot too? So that makes me think maybe some of these like more paranormal or woo encounters, maybe those are just trickster spirits pretending to be Bigfoot. I don't know.
Right. For me, I've always been on the fence. I do believe they exist, but I've always been on the fence between North American primate and some type of Nephilim connection. And there's a lot of theories out there, and there's certainly no wrong answers because all we have is theories. Do you think the government knows that these creatures exist?
I'm going to say, well, all encompassing, no. But I do think there are facets of the government that know. I think, well, for example, Matt, up where you live, in Eastern Washington.
Yeah.
I'm almost certain some of the Fish and Wildlife and the game wardens and the park rangers and the people that work, the Colville National Forest, I would not bet against them knowing that Bigfoot doesn't exist. I mean, I think they know. Yeah. I mean, they get so many reports. I'm sure they probably had some sightings. But I don't think there's a vast conspiracy to keep it hidden. I think it's more of just nobody's going to believe us if we, you go into your boss's office and you're like, hey boss, I saw something really strange the other day. And they're like, you know what? I am not calling Washington and tell them you saw a monkey in the woods. Don't worry about it. Get back to work. I want to get promoted. You want to get promoted. Just let's, move on with our lives. And unless it swims up and bites us in the butt, we're going to ignore it. And I see that with a lot of things. I was pretty high ranking in my police department when I retired. Nobody ever sat me down and said, all right, this is what you do if somebody calls and says they saw a Bigfoot. This is what you tell them. You tell them it was a bear or this or that. So I don't think there's so much a grand conspiracy out there to hide the existence of Bigfoot. I think maybe there might be some localized, I don't want to say conspiracy, but some localized, basically just indifference to the subject where people are just like, I don't know what to do with it, so we're just going to ignore it.
Given your background with law enforcement and working with other Alaska state and also federal agencies, did you ever hear any fellow officers or officials from other agencies allude to the idea that this creature might exist?
I can't say that I ever had anybody approach me and say like they had a sighting or that they were a believer. In fact, I will say probably my limited experience with the Alaska State Troopers puts them at the, like, I mean, you bring up Bigfoot around the Alaska State Troopers and they're like, you're crazy. Like there's no wiggle room. Like, if you mention Bigfoot in front of the troopers, your cheese is slid off your cracker and they're just sizing you up for a white vest,
Yeah.
Um, So I will say that there was a Alaska State Trooper that was big BFRO investigator. He's since retired. I think he lives in Washington now, Matt. And his name came up just in casual conversation one time, and that's the phrase the trooper that I was talking to said. Oh yeah, he was a good guy, and then he got into Bigfoot, and his cheese slid off his cracker. I mean, he went crazy, and that's just kind of how they view it. It's not a sane perspective. I'm pretty sure there were some conversations that took place about me behind closed doors when I got outed out of the Bigfoot closet, as it were. But I guess because it didn't infect other aspects of my life, like I wasn't running around the office, saying like, I think Bigfoot committed this crime. I think I was pretty much ignored. But I never ran into any official that. I know there's some officials that are interested in it, and I know there's some, like fish and game people and some biologists that follow my podcast and my page, and they're interested in it, but they don't make a public. They don't make it public.
So tell our viewers about the podcast and where and when they can find you.
I host the Alasquatch podcast. It is available everywhere that you can listen to podcasts: iTunes, Spotify, any kind of podcatcher. I have a YouTube channel as well. Sometimes I post videos on there, like when I get out and go camping and stuff. I throw some trail camera videos up there every once in a while. And it just kind of, I don't really have a set schedule, man. It just kind of comes out kind of when I got an episode to release. Usually in the winter, it's a little bit more frequently. Sometimes I'll take some time off in the summer to record and build up some content. But, I've been going, I think for like 5 years or something now it's been going. It's probably, I don't want to say it's the first Alaska Bigfoot podcast out there, but I think it's the first Alaska Bigfoot podcast out there.
Nice.
Before we close, let's go back up to Quincy, Washington.
Yeah, I just congratulations on all the shows and everything that you do. And just the tons of good information about Port Chatham. You might be like the expert on Port Chatham with all the research and everything that you've done into it. And also the shows showcasing that area and just addressing the scenario of Port Chatham and the legend basically. Just hope that maybe one day I can have a Bigfoot sighting down here in Washington.
I can send you some hot spots to check out. That I've got a bunch of buddies down there that they've got some good places.
I would greatly appreciate that.
So the book is called Abandoned: The History and Horror of Port Chatham, Alaska by Beans Baxter, available at Amazon. We encourage you to pick up that book. I have it and have read it. It's a good read. It's good education on that area, as Beans was talking about. And we will put a link to his website in the description. And Beans, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to do it. And we look forward to working with you in the future up here in Alaska.
Sounds good, man. We'll have to get out in the woods sometime this summer, and I'll show you some places down here that you can check out.
Yeah, definitely. Again, thank you so much. And, you bring a lot to the Bigfoot community and a lot of great education, and your background in law enforcement and military adds value to the Bigfoot community. So thanks for everything.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
So for myself, Daniel Becker up here in Anchorage, Alaska, and my fellow host in Quincy, Washington, Matt Slater, have a good night. Thanks for joining us.